You asked about the relevance of the left. So, first of all, politics, we can understand why people always constantly talk about the relevance of a political party and its direct reflection in electoral democracy, because that is the only way in which political parties actually appear. They appear once in 5 years and then they disappear, never to be seen again once they become MPs and MLAs. So that's why we think that, oh, political parties means elections. Political parties means, oh, electoral democracy. As a communist party, we fundamentally differ in this way of understanding. We think that politics is not just electoral democracy, but politics is the everyday competition between different kinds of ideas in society. And in that manner, to that extent, the mass movement at Jantar Mantar, the students' protest at Jantar Mantar, was politics at play. Any kind of mass movement, the farm laws, the equal citizenship protests, they were all politics at play. So in that regard, you will find left parties and mass organizations of left parties leading that protest or being actively contributing in that. So politics, one, that. Second, we don't believe that electoral democracy is, of course, irrelevant. That is why we compete in elections. And we do think that in that regard, we must, try harder, and hopefully in the coming years, we will be able to undo what has been done for so many years. But I think that also requires a conversation in electoral democracy. Now, democracy at its core, when somebody asks in a layman's language what is democracy, we say one person, one vote. Everybody's vote has equal weightage. This is democracy. In practice, maybe, but at the level of an idea, this means that everybody in a democracy is equal. This is how a democracy was supposed to be different from a previous setup that we had. This is how democracies are supposed to be different with regard to any kind of setup that has existed in any country previous to that. But when you look at electoral democracy, even the very process of voting. So if I and a person are contesting in elections, that person has secured 40% votes. I have secured 30% votes. That person wins elections. Congratulations. But the 30% people who voted for me, they will go unrepresented. That does not mean that they have equal representation in electoral democracy. So, within the very system of electoral democracy, there are aspects of which betray this idea of equality in a democracy, or one person, one vote, or equal representation, or that people's representation is directly reflected in electoral democracy. Apart from that, we know that even today in India, in several states, there are thousands upon thousands of villages where poor Muslims, Dalits, Adivasis, women, they don't have access to vote. The local feudal lords in their areas, or the dominant henchmen, the political parties' representative who wins elections from there, elections are managed in such a way that villages, electoral ID cards from entire villages are taken away, and on behalf of them, it is the goons of the local feudal lords who go and vote. We know that money and muscle, even though it should be people's equal representation, we know that it is money and muscle essentially which we see at play during elections. We know that entire villages are threatened with dire consequences, with violence, by the local goons of the people who are standing up and contesting in elections to vote for a certain person. We know that cash flows like water during elections. There is open distribution of bribery of voters during election season. So all of these things take place during an election, which raises a question upon the primacy of electoral democracies as the only form of politics. And on top of that, what we are witnessing now the entire process of the SIR that Sir is talking about, where entire sections have been disenfranchised, not just from things like having fundamental right to have essential right to have a passport, or right now, those whose names are not appearing in the SIR lists, they are being cut off from government services and schemes. So disenfranchising entire sections of the populations from citizenship. That is what is happening in SIR. Gerrymandering, manipulating the physical boundaries to benefit a certain political candidate or a political party. The role and absolute crumbling of institutions like the ED, the CBI and the Election Commission. The floundering of the Model Code of Conduct during elections. All of these are systemic problems that have existed as part of an electoral democracy. And if we talk about money and muscle, communist parties represent the interests of the working class, the poorest of the poor. So when you have to fight an election, you have to contest an election, where does your money come from? ML's money last election came from our 50 rupee slips, chanda slips, that we went from house to house and collected from our voters and the people amongst whom we work. So if you want to talk about left's relevance, you will have to talk about the relevance of the current system to represent the poorest of the poor and the marginalized in this country. That is the question. Because bourgeois parties don't represent them, or mainstream political parties fail to represent the poorest of the poor, the working class, the disenfranchised Adivasis, Dalits and women in this country. And if the left, which works amongst these sections of the people, if they fail to find prominence and representation in parliament, then we should also talk about the electoral setup and how relevant it is for the aspirations of the poorest of the poor. So this is how I would answer, I think.